The universe is mental. This principle embodies the truth that all is mind. It explains that the all, which is the substantial reality underlying all the outward manifestations and appearances, which we know under the terms of material universe, the phenomena of life, matter, and energy. In short, all that is apparent to our material senses is spirit, which in itself is unknowable and undefinable, but which may be considered and thought of as a universal, infinite, living mind. This also explains that all the phenomenal world or universe is simply a mental creation of the all. The all is all capitalized, okay? It's subject to the laws of created things, and that the universe as a whole and in its parts or units has an existence in the mind of the all, in which mind we live, move, and have our being. This principle, by establishing the mental nature of the universe, easily explains all of the all of the varied mental and psychic phenomena that occupy such a large portion of public attention, and which, without such explanation, are non-understandable and defy scientific treatment. An understanding of this great Hermetic principle of mentalism enables the individual to readily grasp the laws of the mental universe and to apply the same to his well-being and advancement. The student is enabled to apply intelligently the great mental laws instead of using them in a haphazard manner. With the master key in his possession, the student may unlock the many doors of mental and the psycho temple of knowledge and enter the same freely and intelligently. This principle explains the true nature of energy, power, and matter, and why and how all these are subordinate to the mastery of the mind. One of the old Hermetic masters wrote, long ages ago, "He who grasps the truth of the mental nature of the universe is well advanced on the path to mastery." And these words are true today, as at the time they were first written. Without this master key, mastery is impossible, and the student knocks in vain at the many doors of the temple. This principle embodies truth: as above, so below. As below, so above. So that axiom comes from the Kabbalion: as above, so below, as within, so without. This principle embodies the truth that there is always a correspondence. This is the principle of correspondence. There's always a correspondence between the laws and the phenomena of the various planes and being of life. The old Hermetic axiom ran in these words: as above, so below. As below, so above. The grasping of this principle gives one the means of solving many a dark paradox and hidden secrets of nature. There are planes beyond our knowing, but when we apply the principle of correspondence to them, we are able to understand much that would otherwise be unknowable to us. This principle is of universal application and manifestation on the various planes of material, mental, and spiritual universe. This is a universal law. The ancient Hermeticists considered this principle as one of the most important mental instruments by which man was able to pry aside the obstacles which hid from view the unknown. Its use even tore aside the veil of Isis to the extent that the glimpse of the face of the goddess might be caught. Just like knowledge of the principles of geometry enables man to measure distant suns and their movements while seated in his observatory, so a knowledge of the principle of correspondence enables man to reason intelligently from the known to the unknown. Studying the monad, he understands the archangel. So we have the principle, all is mental, the principle of mentalism. The principle of mentalism states that we exist in a universal mind. And a way to understand that universal mind is to understand the individual mind and then broaden. Then there's the principle of correspondence, which says as above, so below, and as below, so above. So the things that are unknown to us, we could possibly learn from them by looking at the lower emanations. And the lower emanations can be learned by looking at the macrocosm. Okay, and then this book is going to break these down in great depth, but at first it gives an introduction. So we went over the principle of mentalism, there's the principle of correspondence, and now here's the principle of vibration. This is one of my favorites. It says, nothing rests, everything moves. Everything vibrates. This principle embodies the truth that everything is in motion. Everything vibrates. Nothing is at rest. Facts which modern science endorses and which each new scientific discovery tends to verify. And yet, this Hermetic principle was enunciated thousands of years ago by the masters in ancient Egypt. This principle explains that the differences between different manifestations of matter, energy, mind, and even spirit result largely from varying rates of vibration. I think that is fascinating, actually. That energy, mind, and even spirit are the same substance but differ in vibration. From the all, which is the pure spirit, down to the grossest form of matter, all is in vibration. The higher the vibration, the higher the position in the scale. The vibration of spirit is at such infinite rate of intensity and rapidity that it is practically at rest. Just as a rapidly moving wheel seems to be motionless. Can you think about that? A rapidly moving wheel seems to be motionless if it's moving fast enough. And so spirit, it is saying, is moving at such a rapid rate, at such a high frequency, that it is almost as if it's at rest. Okay, so, and at the other end of the scale, there are gross forms of matter whose vibration are so low they seem at rest, like a rock. You know, the vibration is so low that it seems like it is at rest, but it really isn't. Between these poles, there are millions upon millions of varying degrees of vibration. From corpuscle and electron, atom to molecule, to worlds and universes, everything is in vibratory motion. This is also true on the planes of energy and force, and also on the mental planes, when states depend on vibrations, and even on spiritual planes. An understanding of this principle with the appropriate formulas enables Hermetic students to control their own mental vibrations as well as those of others. The masters also apply this principle to the conquering of natural phenomena in various ways. He who understands the principle of vibration has grasped the scepter of power, says one of the old writers. So everything vibrates, every single thing vibrates, and everything it is said is made of energy. And the difference between me and a rock is vibration. The difference between me and the sun is vibration. The difference between me and the moon is vibration. The difference between me and you is vibration. We have a unique vibration. Everything vibrates. And so that is the principle of vibration. So you have the principle of mentalism, the principle of correspondence, and the principle of vibration. And now we're going to move to the principle of polarity. This is one of my favorites. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Listen to this. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Now, pause for a moment. Even the people that you feel have opposite ideas are really the same, but to a different degree, right? All right, let's continue. All truths are but half truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. This principle embodies the truth that everything is dual. Everything has two poles. Everything has its pair of opposites, all of which were old Hermetic axioms. It explains the old paradoxes that have perplexed so many, which have been stated as follows: thesis and antithesis are identical in nature but different in degree. Opposites are the same, differing only in degree. The pairs of opposites may be reconciled. Extremes meet. Everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths are but half truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything, etc., etc., etc. It explains that in everything there are two poles or opposite aspects, and that opposites are really only two extremes of the same thing. I love that. Opposites are two extremes of the same thing. You have light and dark. If we call them color, then they're two extremes of the same thing, which is color, right? Okay. With many varying degrees between them. To illustrate heat and cold, although opposites, are really the same thing. The differences consisting merely of degrees of the same thing. Look at your thermometer and see if you can discover where the heat terminates and the cold begins. That's a nice thought. See, we come knowing what is hot and what is cold, but where does one category end and one begin? It's subjective, actually, because you may say it begins here and I may say it begins there. That's interesting. So it says, look at your thermostat and see if you can discover where heat terminates and cold begins. There's no such thing as absolute heat or absolute cold. The two terms heat and cold simply indicate varying degrees of the same thing. And that same thing, which manifests as heat and cold, is merely a form, variety, and rate of vibration. So heat and cold are simply the two poles of that which we call heat. And the phenomena attendant thereupon are manifestations of the principle of polarity. The same principle manifests in the case of light and darkness. which are the same thing. The difference consisting of various degrees between the two poles of phenomena. Where does darkness leave off? And where does light begin? What is the difference between large and small? What is the difference between hard and soft? When we talk about hard and soft, we're talking about the poles. But the question is, where does hard stop and where does soft begin? We don't really know. We just know the poles. And the difference between the poles is variation of vibration. This same principle operates on the mental plane. Let us take a radical and extreme example of love and hate. Two mental states, apparently totally different, and yet there are degrees of hate and degrees of love. And a middle point in which we take the term like or dislike, which shade into each other as well, so gradually that sometimes we are at a loss to know whether we like or dislike something. And all are simply degrees of the same thing, as you will see if you would but think for a moment. And more than this, it is possible to change the vibration of hate to the vibration of love in one's own mind and in the mind of others. Many of you who read these lines have personal experiences of the involuntary rapid transition from love to hate, and the reverse in your own case and that of others. And you will therefore realize the possibility of this being accomplished by the use of your will by means of the Hermetic formulas. Good and evil are but poles of the same thing. And the Hermetic understands the art of transmuting evil into good by means of application of the principle of polarity. In short, the art of polarization. I like that. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The art of polarization becomes a phase of mental alchemy, known and practiced by the ancient and modern Hermetic masters. An understanding of the principle will enable one to change his own polarity as well as that of others if he will devote the time and study necessary to master the art. So it is said, if he will devote the time and study necessary to master the art. So it is said, hold on, is my screen freezing? It is said that the Hermetic student or the master learns to polarize him or herself rather than being polarized by others and things outside of the self. And so it's saying here that there's an art to polarization, but first you must realize that the opposites are the same thing. And you can alchemize those opposites one into another in your own mind. You can do that. So that means that you're never stuck. And I'm never stuck in one experience, no matter what is going on outside. And one of the reasons that I love these principles, this is the introduction. But when you read it, you get a practice that is so life-changing, that's been around for many, many years. It's ancient, thousands of years, okay? So if you are hating something, you have the ability through the principle, through your knowledge of the principle of polarity, vibration, mentalism, and correspondence, you have the ability through all of those to alchemize yourself away from hate if you don't like it. If you don't like it, you don't have to tolerate it. That's the beautiful thing about being the spark of the divine that we are. But if you don't know that, and if you don't know these principles, you will like kind of flit and flot around with feelings that you don't even want to have because they're not according to universal truth, and you don't know universal truth, you suffer. You think you're stuck. Hey, Void Virtuous, how you doing? Thank you for that. Let's continue. This is so good to me. Like, I get excited reading it. So now we have the principle of rhythm. The principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. And that's a quote from the Kabbalion. I want to read it again because this will help someone who feels like this is a season that you're really not enjoying. And I'm going to tell you how this helps me in business. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. So when I started in coaching and in fitness, and I'm still in coaching and fitness in my business, I realized right away that there's a tide. There's a high season and a low season. Now, when I was in that first year, it was scary because I was just like, what if it doesn't recover? What if the clients don't start? What if? But I learned over time that there's a rhythm, right? So right around, we know at the end of the year, people start making New Year's resolutions. So business rises. And then it's going to stay high until around spring break. Greetings. And then it's going to drop down when school starts. And then it's going to come back up going into the holidays, and then hit the holidays and go back down. So I had to endure enough cycles to understand how this pendulum swings, to understand the rhythm in my business. And so now I alchemize that rhythm to be something useful, to explore new things. So now when business is low, instead of fretting, I go into writing, I go into creating workshops and digital products. And so that when my clients come back and they're ready for fitness and they're ready for coaching, then I don't put it all the way to the side, but I mostly put the writing and courses aside, and I go into action until the next pendulum swing. And so this is something that can really help us in life. If you understand that the pendulum did a swing to the left, is that your left or your right? Is this your left or right? I think you're mirrored. So this is your right, this is my left. Okay. So if the pendulum swings to the right, it's got to come back. So if things are temporarily not in your favor, it's got to swing back into your favor. That's a law. That's not something I made up. That's not some new age thing. This has been around for ages. You're welcome, human rights. So if something is not going in your favor right now, and it's really not in your favor to a deep and profound extent, then understand the opposite has got to come back around too. So you got to hold on. And the question is, when we're going through something like that, what do I need to see? I love this prayer. What do I need to see that I don't see already? What do I need to hear that I don't hear already? What do I need to feel that I don't feel already? What do I need to remember that I don't remember? What do I need to know that I don't know? See, that is the intention when things are not going in your favor, or you feel it, they're not going on in your favor. When I remember there was a time where when I worked with Beachbody, the pendulum was swing. It swung all the way to the right. I was flourishing. I was at the top of my team, and they wanted me to talk to everybody and tell them how they did it. I did it. And then a sickness swept through my house. And then the business swung all the way to the left. Like, wait a minute, we was just at the right. We need to stay at the right, but that pendulum must come back, and it swung all the way to the left. And when I tell you, business just crumbled, and it seemed like I couldn't restart it for nothing in the world. So I had to stop and go, okay, instead of focusing on this, what's next? What's my next step that's going to swing this pendulum back centrally so that I can have more balance, right? And that's when I realized that it wasn't for me to work with Beachbody anymore. It was time for me to create the programs. And so that's what I did. And the pendulum swung all the way back to the right. But I've learned that there are ways to stop the drastic swing. Okay, because it's gonna swing constantly, and we have to discover ways to catch it, like right in the center, where it's not going too crazy, right? It's not going too far to the left. Now we could push it to the right, and when it swings back, we can kind of stop it. There's an art to that, the art of polarization. We just read about that. So now this is the principle of rhythm. So let's continue reading. This principle embodies the truth that in everything there is a manifested, measured motion to and fro. So now y'all have a good idea of what this teaching is about. Go ahead and repost the live and share it with at least one person. You already know what it's about. You see the nature of it. You see the vibe. Like sometimes when you first pop on a live, you don't know what the person is going to say. You don't know what they're doing, so you might not want to share that with your friends. But now you got a feeling of it. And if you would repost it, that would be beautiful. Thank you, Human Rights. If you would share it, that would be beautiful. And now I'm going to continue reading. And y'all can also tap the screen. That's helpful to me also. This principle embodies the truth that in everything there's a manifested measure of motion to and fro, a flow and inflow, a swing backward and forward, a pendulum-like movement, a tide-like ebb and flow, a high tide and a low tide. You know, we can apply this to relationships. You know, there's an ebb and a flow. Sometimes you're high in emotion, but that emotion is not going to always be high. The measure that the pendulum swings to the right, it can swing to the left. So you may also experience periods where there's not intense emotion, and that's normal. But does the pendulum normalize at some point? We have to become masterful at helping that to happen. We can apply this everywhere, y'all. Let's continue. There's a high tide and a low tide between the two poles which exist in accordance with the principle of polarity described a moment ago. There is always an action and a reaction. That's the other thing that we have to realize. There is nothing here on this realm that does not have a reaction. When you say particular things a particular way, there is a reaction. When you make particular choices, there is a reaction. Okay? There's an advance and a retreat, a rising and a sinking. This is in the affairs of the universe, the suns, the worlds, men, animals, mind, energy, and matter. This law is manifest in the creation and destruction of worlds, in the rise and falls of nations, in the life of all things, and finally in the mental states of man. And it is this latter that the Hermeticists find the understanding of the principle most important. The Hermeticists have grasped this principle, finding its universal application, and have also discovered certain means to overcome its effects in themselves by the use of the appropriate formulas and methods. So we have these universal laws that are acting with or without us. And then we become masterful to work with these laws to create a life that feels good. And we can overcome the effects of the laws by becoming knowledgeable about them and applying practices. That's what this is about. So imagine you're trying to win at a game and you don't know any of the rules, so you can't find loopholes. You can't do special things, right? My children, and let me just talk about my own childhood. I'm 48. How old are y'all? I'm 48. So when I was young, Super Mario Brothers just came out. Okay. And you remember in Super Mario Brothers, you could run, you could hit the bricks, you can jump on the little turtle looking things, you could kick the thing and it could knock out some of the Goombas or whatever it was. But then there was a star that you can get. And the star helped make you invincible, right? And the star helped you to achieve more because it was a power up. And then you had the power ups where if you got small, you can get bigger. Okay, so the power up, the stars are akin to learning how to use these laws, right? Because the laws are in operation whether we like them or not. But if we really want to succeed, and if we really want to create lives that we truly do enjoy, we got to learn what the laws are and become masterful at working with them and applying them. I hope that makes sense. So this is why I love studying this, because I become more and more masterful in my life. So it says that the Hermeticists realize that the most important applications of these principles is in the mind of man, in the human mind. The Hermeticists have grasped this principle, finding its universal application, and have also discovered certain means to overcome its effects in themselves by the use of the appropriate formulas and methods. They apply the mental law of neutralization. Ooh. And that's what I'm talking about when I say you have two poles. Let's say in your relationship, you have periods of profound intensity, and you also have periods where you may feel disconnected. But if you apply the mental law, so we have laws and principles, okay? The principle is the overarching axiom, and then you have the laws that support it, right? So the law of neutralization will stop your relationship from doing these rapid swings, but you will be able to station yourself not too far to the left. And if it swings to the right, you know how to keep it back in the middle. You know how to do that rather than swinging to the right and to the left like crazy, right? You know how to stop it by neutralization from going left. But you know how to propel it right also. That's the law of neutralization. We need to know that. I needed to know how to neutralize the pendulum swing of business, the high and low season. How do I neutralize that? I discovered that the neutralization for me is to write and create courses when the client business is low. Therefore, I neutralize my financial swing. Also, it's not going crazy, you know? So again, this is real alchemy. You know, a lot of people use the term alchemy, but this is the real deal. This is the substance of it. And so they applied the mental law of neutralization. They cannot annul the principle or cause it to cease its operation, but they have learned how to escape its effects upon themselves to a certain degree, depending on the mastery of the principle. They have learned how to use it instead of being used by it. In this and similar methods consists the art of the hermetists. Okay, so I want to read that again. The Hermetists have grasped this principle and they give it a universal application. They apply the mental law of neutralization. They cannot annul the principle. They can't stop the principle of polarity. They can't stop the principle of rhythm or the principle of vibration. They can't cause it to cease its operation, but they have learned how to escape its effects. They have learned how to use it instead of being used by it. In this and similar methods consists the art of the Hermetists. I was saying Hermeticists, but it's not Hermeticists, it's Hermetists. Isn't that beautiful? Hey Vibes, how you doing? Isn't that beautiful? You have all of these principles going on. And you have these laws. And the laws help you to use the principle to your advantage. We're talking about alchemy here. Not just the word, but the actual functionality of it. And these are not just my words, right? These are words that have been there for thousands of years. Vibes, what's up with you? Are y'all enjoying this talk? So you can't stop a law from working, but you can use it rather than being used by it. That's so powerful. That's so empowering to me. Because that means no matter where I find myself, I am empowered to create. I am empowered to shift. I love that. The master of Hermetics polarizes himself at the point at which he desires to rest. Can I read that again? The master of Hermetics polarizes himself at the point at which he desires to rest, rather than being tossed to and fro. This situation comes, you're tossed over here. That situation comes, you're tossed over there. You started off feeling high, and then now you feel low because someone said something or someone did something. But this is saying you, as a masterful student, learn how to polarize yourself where you want to rest. You decide. This is not new age woo-woo, someone just telling you something. This is ancient knowledge. You can polarize yourself. Am I the only one getting excited about this? I know it's late, but I'm excited. I'll be so excited about this. Okay, listen. He neutralizes himself at the point at which he desires to rest, and then neutralizes the rhythmic swing of the pendulum, which would tend to carry him to the other pole. So not only does he polarize himself, but he's effective at polarizing the scenario too. The scenario would have normally swept him to the other side, but not only did he polarize himself, he neutralized the pendulum too. All individuals who have attained a degree of self-mastery, they do this to a certain degree, more or less unconsciously, but the master does this consciously. You have so much more grasp than I on the loss. You're welcome. You're welcome. Listen, it says all individuals, that includes you too. All of us who have attained any degree of self-mastery, even if you have a little degree of self-mastery, you do this. but you do it unconsciously. You do it when you know you have to go to work, but you feel nervous. So you work the nervousness out of your system and you do what needs to be done. You do that, but you are unconscious of the principles by which you're doing it. You're unconscious of the practice by which you're doing it. But the masterful student does so consciously. And so the goal here is ascension through being conscious of these laws that are behind the veil of every single thing there is. Taking a peek behind the veil and participating in the organization behind the veil. Okay? So this is super empowering to me. The master of Hermetics polarizes himself at the point at which he desires to rest, and then neutralizes the rhythmic swing of the pendulum, which would tend to carry him to the other pole. All individuals who have attained any degree of self-mastery do this, to a certain degree, more or less unconsciously. But the master does this consciously, and by the use of his will, and attains a degree of poise and mental firmness, almost impossible of belief on the part of the masses, who are swung backward and forward like the pendulum. Y'all hear that? The master does this by use of his will. You must will it to happen. Now, you must will it to happen through the study of these principles, because when a situation is happening, you can identify what principle is at play. And you could choose accordingly to neutralize yourself and the pendulum according to your will, and we do so consciously. As opposed to the rest of the people, they get tossed to and fro. Something bad happens, they feel bad. Something good happens, they feel good. Someone praises them, they feel great. Someone judges them, they feel upset. That's what the masses do. But the master or the student of Hermetics is doing neutralization of self and scenarios by his own will, consciously. We're talking about true empowerment here. I hope this makes sense. This principle and that of polarity have been closely studied by the Hermetists. And the methods of counteracting, okay? So there are universal principles and laws that we can counteract, neutralize, and use. This principle and that of polarity have been closely studied by the Hermetists, and the methods of counteracting, neutralizing, and using them form an important part of Hermetic mental alchemy. We're talking about alchemy. We're talking about energetics. We're talking about spirituality. We're talking about methods of counteracting principles, neutralizing principles, and using them. This is an important part of Hermetic mental alchemy. The principle of cause and effect. I'm going to take a break right there because that's so good. What better thing to be learning on a Friday night but that you are the divine and you are the creator, and you have tools where you don't have to be tossed to and fro by cosmic forces, by principles, by laws, because you are in the study, and not just the study, but the practice of mastery of principles and laws, so that you counteract them, neutralize them, and use them. That's mental alchemy. We got to practice. I was reading earlier today on my live, I was reading about kemetic study and how it's important to apply self-mastery, the practice of virtue, and discipline to your spiritual practice. And so here, that's kemetic spirituality from kemetic yoga philosophy. And now we're talking about Hermetic principles. They're saying the same thing. Even Indian yoga is saying the same thing. Even Gnostic cosmology is saying the same thing. The principle of cause and effect. This is a good one. But this one, this is so good that I have to read it again. Hey, Tomboy. We're talking about real mental alchemy. We're talking about real mental alchemy. I'm going to say it again. We're talking about real mental alchemy. So let me read it. Thank you. I don't think we can hear too much of this. I think we need to hear it over and over and over and over again until we begin to realize and live from the divine that is within, right? I could read this for hours, the same sentences, and become more and more empowered, more and more inspired. Listen. Listen to this. The Hermetists have grasped this principle, finding its universal application, and also have discovered certain means to overcome its effect in themselves by use of the appropriate formulas and methods. They, the Hermeticists, the masters, apply the mental law of neutralization. They cannot annul the principle. You can't stop the principle of polarity. You can't stop the principle of vibration. I'm going to say this again. You can't annul it, right? And you can't cause it to cease its operation. But the Hermetists, the students, the masterful ones, the alchemists, they have learned how to escape its effects upon themselves to a certain degree, depending on the mastery of the principle. It depends on how much you master the principle, the extent to which the effect is lessened in your life. You must master the principle, so you can't just know it. You have to master it. This is mental alchemy. They're giving us the formula and the tools. And we're sitting around like we're not empowered. They're giving us the way, even. So listen, they cannot annul the principle or cease its operation, but they have learned how to escape its effect upon themselves to a certain degree, depending on the mastery of the principle. They have learned how to use it instead of being used by it. I love that. Y'all, I keep repeating it, and I've been repeating it probably for the last 7 minutes. They have learned how to use the principle rather than being used by it. I think I need to keep saying it because so many people are in situations where they are disempowered. They're in a victim energy. And the worst part about it is they don't even know. They're sitting there stuck in stuff they don't like and don't realize that there's something that can be done about it. You have to learn the principle. Number one, you got to know what they are. Not only know what they are, know the intricacies of them, and then understand what laws can be applied to lessen the result of the principles that go on no matter what. You need to learn how to use it instead of being used by it. In this and similar methods consists the art of the Hermetist. I do consider myself a Hermetist. The master of Hermetics polarizes himself at the point at which he desires to rest. The master, not just the person who knows the Hermetic principle, but the one who's practicing the mastery, polarizes him or herself where he wants to rest. And then, not does he only polarize himself, and then he neutralizes the rhythmic swing of the pendulum, which would tend to carry him to the other pole. And they all are practical human rights. That's why I want to talk about them. Because when you get into the Kabbalion, like the breakdown of the whole thing, It's very practical. And the reason that it's practical is it's designed for students. It was once being taught to students, to masters. So it's got to be practical. And that's why I like to teach it, to help it come into the practical realm, right? So let's see. And then he neutralizes the rhythmic swing, because otherwise the situation would have carried him to the opposite pole. But not only does he polarize himself at where he wants to rest, he neutralizes the swing of the pendulum, which would have otherwise swung him in the opposite direction. Everybody is going into anxiety and he's at peace. Everybody is running around, don't know if they're going or coming, but he is at peace. Not because the thing outside is not happening, but he has mastered the law within and learned how to neutralize it within, and thereby is able to help the people on the outside as well. Listen, all individuals, all of you who are listening, all of us who have attained any degree of self-mastery, we are already doing this, but you're doing it unconsciously. But we study and we practice because we want to become more and more empowered, more and more conscious. But the master does this consciously and by the use of his own will, and attains a degree of poise and mental firmness almost impossible of the belief on the part of the masses. They exist in another frequency, and the masses don't understand. Okay, very good, human rights. So this person is on another frequency, the master. They want to tell this person about all the stuff going on and all the reasons why they should be scared and all the reasons why they should be worried. And listen, the master is not turning a deaf ear or a blind eye, because in order to actually polarize, you got to see what the pole is. So this is not denial. This is not ignoring. This is looking at a thing head on and saying, I am still the master of my own mind and therefore my reality, and I shift things. And I shift things because I alchemize it within first. This is an inner job that has outward circumstances, outward results. As within, so without. This is so good. The principle and all that of polarity have been closely studied by the Hermetists, and the methods of counteracting, neutralizing, and using them form an important part of Hermetic mental alchemy. I think I'm released from that and I can move on to the next thing. Y'all ready? The principle of cause and effect. This is a good one. Every cause has its effect, and every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Everything. Chance is but a name for a law not recognized. Hey, Kim. So you might say that happened by chance. No, it happened by a law. You just don't know what it is. A lot of times you don't know why something is happening because you don't know the law, right? This so happened to happen. No, it's a law that you're not recognizing. So let me say it again. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. The law is the law, and you don't have to like it, but you have to understand that the law is the law. And so if you understand that every effect has a cause, and every cause has an effect, then when you're making your choices, number one, you can do so with awareness, and you can do so with accountability too. You can realize, yes, I made that choice and it had this cause, and I'm going to own that. It really empowers us at the end of the day to do so. This principle embodies the fact that there is a cause for every effect, an effect from every cause, and it explains that everything happens according to law, that nothing ever merely happens, that there's no such thing as chance, that while there are various planes of cause and effect, the higher dominating the lower plane, still nothing ever entirely escapes the law. Nothing ever entirely escapes the law. This alchemy is not causing us to escape the law. It's causing us to reduce the effect of it. The effect, hold on, the Hermetists understand the art and methods of rising above the ordinary plane of cause and effect. Rise above the ordinary plane of cause and effect to a higher plane, to a certain degree. And by mentally rising to a higher plane, they become causers instead of effects. So you're being asked to transcend. I've been teaching about the yogic sheaths. I've been teaching about the 9 parts of the human spirit by kemetic spirituality. I'm reading from the Hermetic Principles, and all of them are given the same information. We must transcend the realm of cause and effect. That's the realm of the ego. When you hang around in cause and effect and you don't become a causer, then you're being acted upon. If you're not using the principles, then you're being acted upon. Does that make sense? So what we want to do is become more skillful at using the laws rather than being used by it. Let's continue. Knowing is not enough. It's not. We really need to practice. We really need to learn first, because some people hold definitions and concepts in their heads. It must be made practical. It must be lived out. And we're all practicing this at different degrees. But the goal of reading this is that we will become more and more aware, more and more empowered to create. Let's continue. The masses of people are carried along, obedient to the environment, the wills and the desires of others, stronger than themselves. They're carried along by heredity. They're carried along by suggestion and other outward causes moving them around like pawns on a chessboard of life. But the masters rising to the plane above dominate their own moods, characters, qualities, and powers, as well as the environment around them, and become movers instead of pawns. Did y'all get that? It said the masses, they're being tossed to and fro. If they say run, they say how fast. If whoever says jump, they say how high. But the masters are becoming the movers. They're the ones telling themselves to jump. They're telling themselves to walk. They're telling themselves to create and run, and what time to do it, and what timeline to adhere to. They help to play the game of life instead of being played and moved about by other people's wills and environments. They use, this is capital letters. Can I show you the capital letters? They use, look at it right here. It's capital. They're emphasizing. They use the principle instead of being its tools. The masters obey the causation of higher planes, but they help rule on the lower plane. In this statement, there is condensed a wealth of Hermetic knowledge. Let him read who can. What is that? Thank you. Did y'all get that? The masters obey the causation of higher planes, not the lower ones. They're not sitting around fussing about labels and who's a hater and who thinks they're this or that. That's not where they're at. They're ruling from a higher plane. And they help rule on their own plane. This statement, it's saying, listen, in this statement, there's condensed a wealth of Hermetic knowledge. Let him read who can. That's synonymous to The one who has eyes to see, let them see. If you have ears, hear. If you can read, read it. Okay. The principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its own masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. Gender manifests everywhere. Everything has its own masculine and feminine principle. Okay. The principle of gender embodies the truth that there is gender manifested in everything. The masculine and the feminine are forever at work. This is true not only of the physical plane, but on the mental and even the spiritual plane. The points you stress open up understanding that is easily overlooked. Hashay, human rights. On the physical plane, the principle manifests as sex. Okay, so here we're getting some deeper knowledge here. We're getting some deeper knowledge here. So on the physical plane, the principle of gender manifests as sex. But on the higher planes, it takes higher forms. But the principle is ever the same. No creation, physical, mental, or spiritual, is possible without this principle. Nothing that is created is possible without understanding that there is a masculine and a feminine, and it's not sex. It's something higher. It's on a higher plane. But in this physical body, it may manifest, the principle of gender manifests as sex. But on a higher level, there's no man, woman, male, female. There's masculine and feminine energy, and it does not belong to a man or a woman. It is parts of the same thing, okay? There's no creation, nothing physical, mental, or spiritual. None of that is possible without this principle. And understanding of its laws will will throw light on many a subject that has perplexed the minds of men. The principle of gender works ever in the direction of generation, regeneration, and creation. Everything and every person contains the two elements or principles, or this great principle within him or her. You have in operation the principle of gender within you, masculine and feminine energy. Okay? Every male thing has a female element. Every female thing contains also a male principle. If you would understand the philosophy of mental and spiritual creation, generation, and regeneration, you must understand and study this Hermetic principle. That's why we're not sitting around here fussing about God being a man, because on the higher plane, there's no sex. The sex is a result of the density of vibration that manifests in the world of matter. But on the higher planes, there's no God as a man. There's no God as a woman. There's masculine and feminine principle. And this is calling us to live from the higher realms. That's what the masters do, it is saying. So if you sit here and fuss back and forth about who's a man and who's a woman and who ain't never going to be a man and who ain't never going to be a woman, it's showing that you are locked into this realm and cannot rise above it. Because remember, in this previous paragraph, it says the master rules the lower plane, but governs it from the higher plane. So what are you doing? This is not something that someone just made up. It's ancient. It's in the kemetic spirituality philosophy of enlightenment book. It's in yogic philosophy. So this whole idea and all of these paradigms had existed for thousands of years before the idea that God is a man came. And we could talk about that, but that's not the topic today. Listen. If you would understand the philosophy of mental and spiritual creation, generation, and regeneration, you must understand the study of the principle of gender. This is what, let me get some water. Is this making sense? I think it's only the sapiosexuals that are up this time of night reading the Kabbalion. Only us. Okay, so let's continue. I'm almost done though, and then we're going to get out of here. The principle of gender contains the solution of many mysteries of life. We caution you to think that this principle has no reference to the many base, pernicious, and degrading lustful theories, teachings, and practices which are taught under fanciful titles and which are taught under fanciful titles and which are a prostitution of the great natural principle of gender. Talk about God as a man. It's calling it the prostitution of this principle. It calls anything that does not acknowledge the higher state of gender and this principle operating in higher states. It said it's degrading. It's lustful. I'm reading from the Kabbalion, not the commentaries, not the workbooks. This is the actual Kabbalion right here, right? This principle has no reference to many basic, pernicious, and degrading lustful theories, teachings, and practices which are taught under fanciful titles. In other words, it's saying, I'm not going to name no names, fanciful titles, and which are a prostitution of the great natural principle of gender. In other words, it's fake. Such base revivals of the ancient infamous forms of phallicism, you know what a phallus is, right? Such base, it's calling it base. These are the Hermetic masters, and I think they can call base what they want to call base. They saying it's not even deep, it's basic. And it's a prostitution of a real truth. It says such base revivals of ancient infamous forms of phallicism tend to ruin the mind, the body, and the soul, and the Hermetic philosophy has ever sounded the warning note against these degraded teachings which tend toward lust, licentiousness, and perversion of natural principles. If you seek such teachings, you must go elsewhere for them. Hermeticism contains nothing for you along these lines. Maybe that's why they don't read them. To the pure, all things are pure. To the base, all things are base. I love it. It ends that chapter right there. To the pure, all things are pure. In other words, if you know, you know. If you have eyes, see. If you have ears, hear. All of that machismo and fussing about sex and who is this and that, all of that is a prostitution, is saying. It's degrading. It's basic. Stop doing that. It's not my words. I love them. And I use them though, but it's not mine. The Hermeticist said it. Okay. And so the next chapter, chapter 3, is going to be on mental transmutation. I'm going to stop there because we got some good stuff tonight. Did we not? You're either going to be used by the law, the principles, or you're going to use the laws to neutralize and lessen and counteract the effects so that you can create with them. That's alchemy. Polarizing yourself, neutralizing the pendulum swing, shifting the vibration yourself. That's mental alchemy, it said. And then you stop being a pawn and you become the player. You stop being used and you become the one who is using. So you have principles, which is the overarching idea. And then you have the laws that support the principle.